Hello everyone and welcome to a new crochet tutorial. Today's project is a baby blanket which I worked with loops yarn. This is the first time I worked with such yarn and I really enjoyed the process and I absolutely love the way the baby blanket turned out. This is what the blanket looks like on the right side. It kind of looks like the knitted fabric with knits. And on the back side, it looks like the knitted fabric with pearls. To make this blanket, I used 5 skeins of Alize Puffy fine color. There are 100 grams in one skein, and that is 14.5 meters or 15.8 yards. When I purchased this yarn from Amazon a few weeks ago, they had a great deal. I got 5 skeins for only $13. Unfortunately, now they changed the price to $27.79. Ouch, that's quite expensive. I'd say maybe don't rush into buying it, but do keep an eye on it and they might have a sale on it again. The finished measurements of the blanket are 40 inches by 36 inches. To make this blanket 36 inches wide, I started with 70 loops at the bottom. So over here I had 70 loops. For the purpose of the tutorial, to demonstrate the stitch, I will make a small sample starting with 10 loops. First, I'm going to make the foundation chain. This is the first loop and this is the second, and what I do is I pass the second loop through the first, like this. Then I pass the third loop through the second, and fourth loop through the third, and so on. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is 7, 8, 9, and 10. So now it looks like I have a chain made of 10 chain stitches. Let's check again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And in the 10th stitch I already have 1 loop. Now the working yarn is gonna go to the right, and I will be passing these loops, to which I'm going to refer as back loops, through these loops over here, the front loops. So I leave the first one as it is, it's already worked, and then I take the next loop over here and I pass it through this chain stitch. Like this. So now I have 2 stitches. Next loop I pass through this chain stitch. And I keep doing it. I just pass these back loops from the working strand of yarn through the chain that I created. And when you do it for the first time, it feels very uncomfortable and strange, but as you start doing it more and more, it's gonna become more comfortable. And I keep doing it. And this is the last loop. I pass it through. And now I'm supposed to have 10 loops. Let's double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so this was just the foundational row. Now I'm ready to start working the main stitch. I will be passing through these front loops, these back loops again, but with a little twist. And that twist is literal. I take this first loop and I twist it like this. And then through the twisted loop, I pass the new loop. Here is my second loop. I take it and I twist it like this. And I pass the next loop through it. And as you can see, the stitch over here has a little twist to it. You can actually pass the loops through these front loops without the twist, but then your fabric will look slightly different. It will be a little bit more plain. This twist literally adds a bit of a interesting twist to this pattern. And just make sure that you are staying consistent and you're making your twists in the same direction. So I'm twisting it to the right. You can choose to twist the loops to the left if you want to, but then just stay consistent and make all the loops that way. Okay, here is the next loop. I twist it. And here is the last one. Again, I twist it and I pass the loop through. And again, I must have 10 loops in my piece. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Be careful because it's very easy to miss a loop and you will end up with an extra loop over here. So that's why it's a good idea to check it and perhaps even count the stitches. And of course, when you are working the big blanket, it takes more time and effort to count all the stitches, but it's totally worth it because if you make a mistake, then you'll have to unravel quite a lot. Okay, and I continue doing it. So the next row, again, the first stitch, I twist it and I pass the new loop through it. The second one, I twist it and I pass the loop through it. And that's how it is worked. Just the same thing over and over again. I work to the left and then I work to the right, to the left and to the right. And I always stay on the right side of the piece. I almost said crochet piece, but this is not exactly crochet. So here I have, let's see, 4 rows worked. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 4 rows, and you begin to see what the fabric looks like. Here I have a 10 by 10 sample that I made. There are 10 loops in each row, and I made 10 rows. Now let me show you how I connect 2 skeins together. I actually stitch them using a needle and sewing thread. So here I have 2 ends of 2 different skeins and I overlap them like this so that each loop is next to each other, and then I simply stitch them using white thread, or you can use something that matches the color of your yarn. So I make several stitches to secure the yarn tails together. And then I make a small knot to secure the thread. And now I can cut it off. And now I can cut off these short tails. And now I have my yarn securely connected. Here I worked 73 rows, not including this foundational chain. So after I made 73 rows, I'm going to close that last row over there. And I also left just enough yarn that goes down and up, and that's because I'm going to make a edging on the sides of the blanket, on this side and on this side right here. This is the last row. This is the row number 73. I worked it from right to left, so I have the yarn tail on the left, but I go to the beginning of this row, and here is what I do. I take the first loop and the second, and I pass the second one through the first loop. Then I take the third loop and I pass it through the second loop. I take the next loop and I pass through the previous one. And that's how I'm going to continue closing my last row on the blanket. And as you can see, I'm getting a beautiful straight edge. Here I finished that last row, closing that last row, and now I'm going to work along this side because I want to create a nice edge over here. So I turn my work this way now, and here is what I do. Here are the last stitches of each row. So this is the first one, and my last loop is over here, and this is the second one. So I pass the second loop through that last stitch, and then I pass the second loop through the first loop like this. Here is the next loop, and I pass it through the next stitch like this, and then I also pass it through the previous loop like this. Again, the next loop I pass through the next stitch, and then I pass this loop through the previous loop like this. And again, I begin to get a nice edge over here, the same as over here. So the next loop, this one, I pass through the next stitch, and then I also pass it through the previous loop. And that's how I'm going to continue working all the way across to the next corner. And here I am at the corner, so this side is done. What I'm going to do next is cut off the yarn tail, and this last loop I'm simply going to stitch to this yarn tail like that, just using a needle and a regular sewing thread. So I'm gonna make several stitches here to secure that last loop. And this is the other side of the blanket that still needs to be worked. I need to make an edge over here. And this is where I started the entire blanket. So into this corner, I take my remaining yarn and I pass the first loop through the first stitch. And then I pass the second loop through the second stitch. Now I pass the second loop through the first loop. I pass the next loop through the next stitch, and then I pass it through the previous loop. And that's how I'm going to work this side as well, making that beautiful edge. Now back here at the corner I have these tails, and what I'm gonna do a bit later is simply use a sewing needle and a thread and secure them over here, make several stitches, and then cut off the remaining tails. And here is the last corner. This is the last loop. The edge is done, so now I cut off the remaining yarn tail. There's only a tiny piece of yarn left, and now I will use a needle and thread to secure this last loop over here, and then the blanket will be finished.